Welcome, everyone. My name is Hannah. I lead email and community at Grow Class, so you probably see me around in the ecosphere, in your email inbox and on Zoom. If you're not familiar with Grow Class, we are a 6-week growth marketing course and community filled with founders, marketers, and freelancers. So we teach folks the skills they need to build their careers and grow their businesses. Our next cohort actually kicks off on Monday. So if you're interested in learning more about Grow Class, I can drop a link in the chat for you so you can poke around there and see what's up. But today I'm really excited to learn about conversion rate optimization with Shanelle Mullin. So Shanelle is the Experimentation and Analysis Lead at Shopify. She has a 15-year background in growth and considers herself to be a Jill of all trades marketer. She dabbled in a little bit of everything, and she pretty much helped a 3-person startup grow to $1 million business before her 18th birthday, which I think is hella impressive. I don't even remember what I was doing when I was 18, but it wasn't making $1 million, that's for sure. So thank you, Shanelle, for being here with us today. I will drop all of Shanelle's links in the chat, so if anyone wants to connect with her, you can find her there. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat as well. We'll do our best to have a little time for Q&A at the end. There's no such thing as a dumb question, so we're all here to learn, judgment-free zone. Just ask that you keep it kind and respectful. With that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Shanelle to learn all about conversion rate optimization.
Great, thank you. I always like that version of the bio because I feel like it flags that I was deeply unpopular in high school. Spent a lot of time on the computer. So I'm going to chat through conversion rate optimization 101. I'm going to go through kind of how I come up with experiment ideas that are informed by data. And then it's pretty long and tactical. So at the end, there's room for questions or like next steps of what do you do when you have the experiment ideas. Happy to chat through that in like more of a Q&A format. Also, definitely feel free to stop me or like interject or raise your hand or anything like that. I'm happy to chat midway through. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to walk us through is heuristic analysis. And one thing to note here is that it's probably the least objective thing I'm going to talk about today. It's not perfect, but I think it kind of follows the principle of done is better than perfect. And often it is good enough to get you started. So this is the first thing that I start with when I'm analyzing a website, analyzing an email campaign, any surface really. I'll probably talk about it more so in terms of a website, but all of these principles and processes can be applied to really anything you're trying to optimize. And then, of course, I think an important caveat is that experience does matter. So as you do this and as you run through this process more and more, you will get more comfortable with it, first of all, which is always nice, but then also you'll start to know what to look for, and the principles that we're going to talk about will become more second nature. So if you can get as many people involved in this process as possible, that's great. And getting everyone kind of familiar with it and having them have more experience will pay off in the long run. So to keep it as objective as possible, I know I said it wasn't super objective, but to keep it somewhat objective and prevent people from kind of just calling out their opinions and preferences, I like to try to focus the analysis on a few principles. So as we're going through, if we call something out, we say what principle it relates to. And so the 5 principles are what we'll go through here. The first one being relevancy. So really relevancy is kind of asking the question of how well does each page match what the visitor thought they were going to see. So you'll be looking for things like, does the page's content meet expectations? Does the page's design meet expectations? And how can we match expectations versus reality even more? The next one is clarity. I would argue if you only focused on one thing when auditing your website, it would be this. This is kind of the question of, is what's being offered and how it works perfectly clear on all pages? So here we're asking ourselves questions like, is the content clear? Is the value proposition clear? And how can we make it clearer? This seems like an obvious one. I think a lot of them seem like obvious ones, but because we're so familiar with our product and with our company and our offerings, it can be really easy to overlook the ways in which our messaging and our value propositions and our marketing is unclear to people who don't have the inside knowledge. Motivation is the third principle. So are the motivators clear? Are they believable? And are they timely and persuasive? I think the believable one is a key factor. Like I think a common example is when someone says, you know, the best coffee in New York City, and then you walk 2 miles down the road and there's another one who has that same sign in their window. Like, you need to make sure that your value proposition and how you're motivating people is actually believable. So here we're asking ourselves questions like, what's the motivating factor for visitors to take action? Is it clear, believable, timely, and persuasive? And then how can we increase motivation even more? The fourth factor is friction. I think this is the one we're probably the most familiar with. We talk about it a lot in marketing, and how do we reduce friction? Really what we mean here is what could be a source of fear or anxiety on each of the pages. So what's causing doubts or hesitations or uncertainties? Is there anything that's making it technically difficult to take an action? And then how can we simplify the process and reduce the time to value for visitors? And then the last one is distraction. So is there anything distracting the visitor away from your most wanted action? And I think this kind of brings up the idea of like a messaging hierarchy. There's going to be many things, even within your website, even within a single page, kind of demanding folks' attention. And so you want to be really, really purposeful about which is the most demanding and which is the most prominent, so that you're not giving lesser value calls to action more prominence on the page. So a little bit of distraction is totally okay and is good UX, but you want to be very purposeful about what that distraction is and how you're presenting the different options to people. So here we're looking to ask ourselves, what's not helping the user take action that's on the page? What's drawing attention? And do you feel okay with where it's drawing attention to? And then is everything that's drawing away from that most wanted action actually really necessary? So again, I would definitely recommend doing this in a group, preferably as cross-functional as possible. Like if you have marketing, UX, engineering, and everyone else kind of aligned on those 5 principles, going through page by page, you'll get the best results. And you'll end up with a pretty big list of callouts. Ideally, you overlay them over like a screenshot of each page so that you can see specifically what you're pointing to when you go back later. And also, in my opinion, I tend to keep these walkthroughs around for years to come. They stay pretty evergreen. I think we overestimate how much our websites and our messaging and maybe not so much the design, everyone loves a redesign, but everything else changes over the span of a few years. So the next part of this is kind of digging into the quantitative analysis. So what I like to do here is take everything I just called out in heuristic analysis and try to prove, disprove, or kind of investigate further with actual data, because you should always verify everything with data. Again, that process was really subjective, even with our attempts to make it a little more objective. Definitely don't skip actually trying to add data around your informed opinions. So before you kind of dig into data for analysis specifically, I think it's really important to do some technical analysis to make sure that everything on your website is working the way that you think it is. Also kind of sounds silly, but I promise you your website does not work the way you think it does for someone on some browser or some device. There's definitely someone out there who's still using a Motorola Razr to try to access your website. And it's important you know what that process is like for them. So I'm just going to go through a few things to make sure your technical side of things, including how you've set up your analytics, is actually functioning the way you think it is. And so also, I guess an important caveat, I'm going to use screenshots from Google Analytics just because I think it's the most accessible and I think it's the most widely used, but you can repeat these same processes with any data source. It'll just, the interface will look a little different, of course. So what we're looking at here is the audience technology browser and OS report, and I've switched from the default data view to the comparison view on that far right side, the green and red bars. And basically what I'm looking to do is identify browsers that are performing worse compared to the average for the site. The metric that I'm comparing on is bounce rate, which I wouldn't recommend. The particular Google Analytics setup that I use just didn't have a conversion rate configured, but ideally you're using a conversion rate, your primary, probably top of funnel conversion rate for this comparison. So when you do find something that isn't performing well compared to the average, you definitely want to double click down into the browser itself. So you really wouldn't get a lot of value comparing Safari to Chrome. What you want to do is like click into Chrome and then see which versions of Chrome are performing better or worse than other versions of Chrome. And that's where you'll kind of get the best indication of what's working, what might not be working very well, or where your website might be broken on certain browser types. And then we just want to basically repeat that same process for devices as well. So this is the audience mobile devices view. And then again, I've switched from the data view to the comparison view to give me the red and green comparison. And then again, you want to make sure you're comparing within the same family. So it's not super helpful to look at Google Nexus versus Samsung, but it is super helpful to look at all of those different types of Samsung phones and compare and contrast between the same family of devices. That was just a super quick overview. I think it would be negligent for me not to call out that mobile is like a completely different beast. The ideal UX for mobile is often completely different from the ideal UX for desktop. I don't think most companies are there yet in terms of having completely separate experiences. So I'm just trying to give like a step one of trying to make sure that you're at least thinking about mobile. But ideally, you're doing your optimization distinctly and then they become two different experiences. The final part of the technical analysis is around speed. So we want to make sure that our website is as quick as we think it is, and as quick as it should be. I think it's pretty well researched. I mean, for every best practice, there's an example of when it's untrue, but I would say this is one of the ones I've seen proven time and time again, that speed does have a direct connection to conversion rate. And I think it's important to note that the metric we're really looking for is that page interactive time, which is seconds until the website is usable. I think a lot of the times we use page load time, which is actually until everything is done loading on the page. So I'll use page interactive time throughout the rest of this. And then also, I think it's important to know how much time you should spend on this, because your website could always be faster, just like your conversion rate could always be better. As a rule of thumb, if your website loads in 3 seconds or less, you're probably good. You're not going to get that much value from continuing to optimize your site speed in terms of conversion rate. I'm sure there's some UX and engineering folks who are like, I completely disagree. But from a conversion point of view, you're probably good if it's 3 seconds or less. Anything more, it's probably worth investing in, especially if it's 7 seconds or more. So when you're looking into page speed, we're going to do something similar to what we did for cross-browser and cross-device testing. We're going to look at behavior, site speed, and page timing. Again, we've got that comparison view with the red and green, and I have the metric set to average interactive time. So basically what this will generate is a list based on how popular the page is by page views of pages that aren't loading super quickly. So I would literally just copy and paste a list of everything with a red bar in order that they appear. And I would save those for later to kind of go through and troubleshoot, preferably with someone from an engineering team or the dev team, to figure out why those might be slower than average and how we can improve it. If you don't have access to an engineering or a dev team, you can also use a number of page speed tools that are on the internet. Google has one, but many other companies do as well, and most of them are free, and it will kind of just audit the page quickly and give you an idea of what you could do or what could be an issue. I would definitely recommend verifying on your side, like anything, but I find they're pretty accurate for quick fixes. Okay, so you're sure that all of the technical side of things is working the way you think. Now it's time to get into web analytics analysis, the other part of quantitative analysis. I think generally, I believe that there is no such thing as having not enough data to do web analytics analysis. I think as an industry, we become very obsessed with big data, and we want as much data as possible, and maybe we can't optimize because we don't have all of these different data points. I promise you probably have enough data to do web analytics analysis. And that's especially true if you go in with a problem to solve or a question to answer. Honestly, more data just makes it more confusing of like, what is important here, and you're just kind of overwhelmed with data. And so having a specific problem to solve or a specific question to answer is really, really helpful. I'm sorry for the Tony Robbins quote, but it was the most relevant to this point. Okay, so before I go in and I'm looking to do the web analytics analysis, I just want to make sure Google Analytics is set up properly. It's pretty out of box, but I think there are a few gotchas along the way. The three things I'm looking for are, am I collecting the data that I need? Can I trust the data that I am collecting? And is there anything broken or reporting incorrectly? And if so, why? Those are very large questions, but I think there's three common problems that come up, and this solves about 80% of the setup issues that I've seen over the years. Number one, if pages are missing, you can use checkers online, and they'll check to make sure you have the latest code and which pages are missing so that you can add it in with just a prioritized list of pages. And then if you're noticing that the data is different between a shopping cart tool or any other tool, any other third-party tool you might be using, it usually comes down to installation issues or the reports being in different time zones. If you set up the e-commerce tracking midday, that can have an effect. And then also sometimes canceled transactions don't show in Google Analytics. So that's also another thing to look out for, and just make sure you're reconciling on a consistent basis so that your data doesn't get too far off of where it should be. And then also cross-domain tracking. So if you are using multiple domains and you're not able to see how the same user crosses between them, that can be really difficult. Make sure that you're sharing cookie info with other domains that are involved in your website setup. I also have an entire article that I wrote on this topic. If you want to go into more detail, if you suspect that your Google Analytics setup is wrong, that'll kind of walk you through more tangibly what this kind of troubleshooting could look like. But assuming that it is set up correctly, I like to start with the highest value pages, which to me are either high volume, low value pages, which could be like a blog post, or the low volume, high value pages, which could be like a checkout page or the sign up page. And for me, I like starting with the former, but I spent a lot of time in content marketing, so maybe I'm biased, but I think it's a great place to start where you already have the audience, especially if you're a small company. Your surfaces that you can actually experiment on due to traffic size are going to be limited. And I think content is a really great place to start when you're thinking about running experiments. You might notice that I have an advanced filter on here. That's just to filter out pages with too small of a sample size. I think I said anything less than 1,000 page views I wasn't interested in. But for the most part, what you're looking at here is, again, just a prioritized list of pages that are not converting well compared to the site average. And so again, I'm just making a list. I'm making a list of all of the things I want to dig into later, so that I can kind of come back to it for the qualitative part of this analysis. I also like to pay attention to 404 pages. I think, we know they're bad for UX. They're also really bad for SEO. And they're also, of course, bad for conversion. So generally, when I'm starting an audit, I'll go in and find all of the broken links. And the way that I do that is I just search for the page title of my 404 page. In this case, it's page not found. And then when you click into it, again, you're just going to have a prioritized list of URLs that are returning the 404 page, and then you can kind of systematically go through and improve them. If you happen to open this up and see that the page view counts are only like 2 to 10, probably, again, not going to be a huge ROI, but I think it's more common that the numbers are much higher. Also, you can use the full refer secondary dimension to see URLs that are referring traffic to each of those pages. And then if necessary, you can then systematically reach out to all of them to let them know what the new URL is, or set up a redirect to kind of solve the problem on your end. And then when it comes to auditing the funnel, this is the funnel visualization report in Google Analytics. I don't find it the most helpful, but this is generally where I start. I just want an overview of what the funnel looks like, A, to make sure I'm tracking all of the conversion points that are in my funnel in Google Analytics, and then B, to see where the biggest drop-offs are. And then also, I always just like to call out that I think the top of the funnel gets like the hero cut, if you will, of optimization. It's much easier to influence the conversion rate up there. That's where you see articles, if they're true, saying things like, 100% increase or 50% increase in conversion rate. And then as you go down the funnel, you need to have a much smaller impact to have a similar size impact on something like revenue, right? So a 1% improvement on your checkout page is much more valuable to you than a 10% increase at the sign up part of the funnel. Again, generally speaking, for most companies. So I like to keep that in mind, and I don't necessarily always start with the top of the funnel, unless it's just an easier place to experiment. The report that I think is a little bit more actionable is the goal flow report, which is what we're looking at now. It shows the most accurate path. So if the previous version is kind of the ideal path or like the ideal linear funnel, this is a more accurate reflection of what people are actually doing on your website. And also it's more flexible in that you can apply advanced segments and also date comparisons, which you can't do in the funnel visualization report. So this, again, just helps me kind of prioritize my digging and optimization. It shows you where people are going and then also where they're leaving to, which can be very, very helpful, whether they're leaving the page completely or they're leaving the page to go back to a previous page. And then just as a note, like in the top left-hand corner, you can see source. So I have it selected by traffic source, but again, you can do really anything in terms of advanced segments here. So you can look at campaigns from your paid efforts. You can look at device type or browser. You can look at pretty much anything. And I find segmenting at this level can be a really great way a really fast way to start digging into segmentation. And then there's also the reverse goal path report, which I also really like. This again shows you actual funnels. And I think more often than not, people discover funnels that they didn't know existed. I think we have an idea of a linear funnel, and it's really easy to communicate to stakeholders and to leadership teams and to kind of organize our growth teams around. But in reality, people are converting in all sorts of unexpected ways. And the more you know about those ways, the more you can optimize them. So I honestly just go through this page by page, and I'm looking for funnels that I would have never thought of, or flows that I never would have thought of, or like even sequencing of pages that they visit before they convert, and trying to make note of which ones are the most popular. And then the last thing I'm looking at in terms of the web analytics analysis is internal search. Again, maybe my content marketing background coming through, but if you have some sort of internal search on your website with some digging, it'll show you what people are searching for and how effective you are at helping them find it. So this can be really useful, even if it's only on your blog, but if you have it site-wide, it's even more useful. What I do is use page on site, or sorry, time on site after visiting, after conducting a search, so that I know how well I was able to satisfy that search. So I'm making the assumption that the longer they spend after searching, the more successful I was at satisfying their search. And then anything, again, that's on the red side, I'm making a list of it, especially if it is something that's commonly searched, and I'm going to try to address it either with new content or with refreshing the existing content that's there. But then at the end of the day, I really think segmentation is everything. I think we talked very briefly about how to get into that with the advanced segments, but this could be like a talk of its own, and I don't want to take up too much time on it. I've written an article on this as well, where I try to go in more tactically into how you can segment and which segments are usually most impactful to dig into. So I just want to call out that it really does make a huge difference, and is kind of where I think you'll get the most valuable insights from web analytics analysis. So happy to share that link after as well. And then there's just a few more research or analysis types on the quantitative side that I like to dig into. The first one being click maps. I think we're all pretty familiar with click maps and scroll maps. My hot take is that I don't think click maps are that useful. The information is largely available in Google Analytics itself. It's just quantitative and not in a nice visual. What I think click maps are really helpful for is seeing what people are clicking on that's not currently a link, because that can give me an idea of what's unclear on the page and what people want more information on, either on the page or to add as a link, but preferably I'm adding it to the page that they're on and not requiring that they do more work to find the answer they're looking for. Scroll maps, I think, are the other half of this. I think they're a little bit more useful than the click map counterpart. Typically, we're using them to prioritize our content and messaging. Any sort of drastic color change. So if you see at the top, it goes from kind of like white or yellow, and then it like dramatically shifts to a cooler color. That means there's a big drop off, and usually means there's some sort of need for a visual cue. Most often this happens just above the fold, where folks think that there's nothing below, and that's why you might want to consider a visual cue to keep them scrolling. It also comes up often on longer pages, especially sales pages, where people think each section could be the end and they don't keep scrolling. So kind of thinking through how you keep people moving down the page, particularly long pages, is quite a large task, and scroll maps can definitely help. And then the last one for quantitative is form analytics. There are separate tools that can do this, and you can also, again, set it up in Google Analytics. You can track what people are clicking on, what they're filling out, completion rates, all of that stuff. But if you want to use a separate tool, just out of the box, that's also great. What I'm really looking for, because there's going to be a lot of information in those tools, I'm really looking for what form fields cause the most errors. I'm looking for fields that people hesitate to fill out. And then I'm looking for fields that people leave empty, even if they're required. That one is especially helpful for anything you're doing that's lead gen related, so that you know what the right amount of friction and what the trade-off for each additional element of friction is for your form. Okay, so that was all of the quantitative stuff. Now I'll talk briefly about some of the qualitative research. I think this is the fun part. I work in quantitative data, but I think qualitative is the most exciting, because it really tells you why people are exhibiting the behaviors they're exhibiting. I think it's interesting to look into the what, which is the quantitative. The qualitative really gives us, or starts to give us, a picture of why people are doing what they're doing. So the first one I look into is session replays. This is definitely my favorite one. A mentor of mine, when I first started, told me that I would get sick of this very quickly. And it was one of the few things that he was completely wrong about. I still love it. I could watch as many of them as people will let me. I think what's cool about it is that it's just real people with real money actually visiting your site, and you're looking for, where do they pause? Where do they give up? And I'm really using session replays to double click into anything in heuristic analysis or quantitative analysis that had a red flag. So anything that was performing worse than the average in all of those lists that we made, I'm looking to kind of validate with the session replays why they might be performing worse. And there is a point of, despite my enthusiasm, there is a point of diminishing returns. You could actually watch these forever. I recommend just watching enough that you start to pick up on the trends. If one thing doesn't work for one person, it's probably not a huge deal. If you repeatedly see people running into the same pattern, it's likely worth digging into. And then we kind of get into surveys. So this is divided up into on-site surveys and then also customer surveys. On-site surveys being the first one. So those are the surveys that pop up while the person is visiting your website. More commonly, I use either exit surveys or on-page surveys. So exit surveys, aptly named, it's when someone is showing exit intent. Maybe they're in the top of the browser or hovering over the X on the tab. The survey will pop up and ask them a question. The alternative are on-page surveys, which pop up after a certain amount of engagement with the page. So they're still actively engaged. For both of them, regardless of when they're triggered, I like to focus on actionable data, which to me at that level of the funnel is on the friction. So I'm really trying to go back to that friction principle and understand what friction is or is not there, and have people fill in qualitatively how they're perceiving the website. So some of the common questions I'm looking to ask are, what was the purpose of your visit? Were you able to complete the task or fulfill your purpose? It's very existential. If not, why? And then is there anything holding you back? And then do you have any unanswered questions? One caveat there, though, is that these people don't really know you. They're not customers. They're just checking you out, and they probably don't feel like they really owe you anything. So I like to either go with one open-ended question. So pick one of those that you think will get at what friction is on your site or not. And then the alternative is you could do a yes/no question with an open, like, why or explanation. Those are the two options that I find get the best response rates, but feel free to experiment, of course, on your website and see what's true for your audience. And then we also get into customer surveys. So this is people you actually know, people who have converted and are in your system, whether it's, someone who signed up for a trial if you're a SaaS company, or someone who just made a purchase if you're an e-commerce company. I like to stick to first-time buyers. There's definitely a case to be made that you should survey your long-term clients or long-term buyers. Definitely true, but when you're kind of just getting started with CRO, I'm much more interested in the acquisition part of the funnel to get started. And I would argue that retention is kind of further down the road and also kind of a different beast. So generally, I'm looking at first-time buyers who have no previous relationship, and I'm shooting for about 200 responses, which is truly just a made-up number. Again, it's kind of just to combat the potential problem of spending too much time going down a rabbit hole or too much time with the qualitative information. It takes a really long time to codify all of the responses and try to analyze it to identify patterns and trends. So in my experience, about 200 responses is where I start to see diminishing returns after that. And that's where that number comes from. But again, just be sure to find out what's true for you and don't spend too much time on it, because you could truly spend hours just on one person's response and trying to dig into everything that they flag. The questions for this are a little bit different. So for the customer surveys, I'm looking to understand the value that they believe we deliver, and then also what the perceived friction was during the sign-up process. So with the on-site surveys, we were really just focused on the friction, and with customer surveys, I start to get into more of the value proposition and understanding what they think the value is. So here I'm looking to know who they are, what are they using the product for, what problem it solves for them, what they like about the product most, and then getting into kind of the perceived friction, like did they consider any alternatives? Why did they choose us over the competition? What's the one thing that nearly stopped them from buying? And then what was their biggest concern or fear about buying from us or buying the product? And then I believe actually last is user testing. So I think this weird gate thing that made us get off our bikes and walk around is familiar to most of us. And I think most of us probably just drove around it on the grass, as demonstrated here by this makeshift path. And I think that this is where user testing really benefits us, right? Like there is the user experience that we've designed and think that people should take, much like the linear funnel that we think everyone follows neatly and safely. And then there's like the messy reality over on the grass. And so user testing can be super humbling and is very much worth the time. So when I'm doing user testing, as in like having actual conversations with users and watching them interact with the website, I'm really looking to have them complete 3 different tasks and walk me through it as they do. Tell me what they're thinking, kind of narrate their frustrations, narrate their thought process, narrate how they're trying to accomplish the task that I've given them. So first I do a specific task, like find a very specific product on our website to make sure that they can do that. Then I'll give them a broad task, like finding a blog post that they're interested in. So it's less prescriptive. And then I'll ask them to do a full funnel completion. So either buying a product, signing up for a free trial, signing up for a monthly subscription. Of course, it won't actually cost them money, but I want to make sure that they are able to go through the process. And it's very, very important to just watch and listen. Don't ask for their opinions. Don't try to prompt them. It sounds really mean, but don't try to help them. Just observe silently as they try to complete the task that you've given them. Ideally, most of the communication is coming from them and you're having very little intervention in the process. So once you have done heuristic analysis, quantitative analysis, and qualitative analysis, you have a huge list of potential problems, a huge list of ideas, a huge list of things you should probably just fix, maybe some you should experiment with, maybe some that aren't worth a controlled experiment and you just want to optimize and do like a pre-post analysis. But I feel like at this point, I'm kind of asking myself, like, what would Miranda Priestley do? And the answer to that is bucket and prioritize all of the things that have come up during these 3 processes, combine them all together. And again, the buckets that I like to use are kind of like just do it, optimize, experiment. And then also there's some that are just like still questions or things that I want to research or do further analysis into, because we're not sure. We weren't able to diagnose it. It's still an unknown. And what I do is put those into one big spreadsheet, and then I'll have the whole team prioritize on a scale from 1 to 3, what they think is the most important, and then have that all roll up into one score, and then systematically kind of work my way through the list. And that should be enough to fuel your CRO program for about 6 to 8 months. Especially if you did it in a group and it wasn't just you kind of like going through the process. And that was all I had, but I'm happy to answer any questions or go back into anything or go deeper into anything.
Yes, thank you so much, Shanelle. That was really helpful. Love learning about this stuff. Thank you for that. I will open the floor up to if anyone has any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself as well. Whatever works. We can do the little awkward therapy silence if anyone's typing out your question as I speak. Yeah. Nice. Thanks, Meredith. Appreciate it. I saw you. Is anyone unmuted there? Oh, Sarah. Okay.
I was just going to say, if you are coming from potentially a much smaller, like earlier stage company that doesn't have a ton of existing data to kind of pick through, do you have any tips on how to do this work effectively with, maybe starting from zero?
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely start with the heuristic analysis. I think I'm a really big proponent of working with what you have. Like I've read a lot of articles and a lot of folks have spoken about like experimentation isn't the right option for everyone, and some companies are too small, which I think is true. Controlled experimentation is not the best use of time for every company, especially small companies. You may only have the capacity for, like, say 10 experiments a year. And you want to use that wisely. But I think that there is a difference between optimization and experimentation. I feel like optimization is the umbrella and controlled experimentation is one way to optimize your website. And so if you don't have a lot of quantitative data, I would definitely try to get as many insights as you can from the heuristic analysis. And then if you do have customers, even a small amount of customers, I think the qualitative side can be very, very helpful as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the time in growth, the qualitative stuff gets slightly overlooked in favor of the quantitative.
Yes. Yeah. Or we use the quantitative to come up with experiment ideas or hypotheses. And I think like a lot of them could be answered or could be validated or invalidated with the qualitative, instead of kind of spending the experimentation budget or the capacity that you have on an experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Meredith, I saw you turn on your camera. I don't want to steal anything from you.
I'm curious to know if there's any other tools besides Google Analytics that you have in your toolkit when you're doing this kind of work.
Yeah, for sure. I am a big fan of Hotjar for the session replays and the heat maps. And then I actually have never had to say this tool's name out loud before for the form analytics. I think it's Formisio. I'm actually not totally sure, but it's a great tool and I'm a big fan. I'm sorry to their team. But that's cool. It's also great for the form analytics. Like I said, you can do that technically in Google Analytics, but it isn't the most intuitive, and I often find it's like not worth the trouble unless you're quite technical.
Awesome. All right, crew. Well, thank you everyone for pulling up today. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop me an email, hannah@growclass.co. I'll get it over to Shanelle. Yeah, we'll drop Shanelle's links again in the chat for anyone who wants to connect with her here. And yeah, thank you so much, Shanelle, for sharing all your expertise with us today. Shanelle's also in our Slack community, so if you're in Grow Class, you can find her there as well. I'll be sending out the recording for this session as soon as it's ready, with all the links and everything that were shared. And other than that, have a good rest of your Wednesday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Take it easy, friends. Bye.